Sir Red, for providing insights and for reminding us to see how the heroes of the past have been intertwined, must be read together, not only as independent accounts, but as singularly made up of smaller pieces, inseparably interrelated, which includes these revolutionaries which do not merely fought in the armed struggle, but those who also cultivated them. As a man who had used everything in his toolbox, he has gleaned from everyone and everything around him, and distilled these insights into writing. Through this writing, ideas and quoted conversations reveal that Renato Constantino was a man truly ahead of his time. Imparted by Renato Constantino to his fraternity brothers, words for his fellow Alcans, which remain a guide for each and every one of us. We shall not be saved without wisdom, for knowledge is power, but only wisdom is true. The information that we have access to right now in the modern age, while it provides us with a lot of power, while it informs most of us, we cannot just, these will not lead us to any kind of liberty, whether in the terms of sovereignty, whether in terms of economic freedom, economic liberty, if it was not tempered by wisdom. We must be guided through our historical insights, through the wisdom from our elders, and we must be guided by the wisdom ingrained in between the lines of the history, in between lines of history. For us to have a glimpse into some of the lives or the people in between those who have written part of our history or have documented part of our history, we are pleased to announce that there will be a 3-week retrospective exhibit at the Yochenko Museum from June 11 to June 30, titled Pasts Revisited. This exhibit will feature rare and never-before-seen materials, including personal letters, manuscripts, and artifacts from the lives of Renato and Leticia Constantino. The Sir Red has shared with us that the exhibit will also feature new works and recent campaigns anchored on the concept of the usable past that Renato and Leticia had pioneered. We encourage everyone to visit, not only to get a peek of who these people were behind the books and the articles, but to deepen the connection to the author, to have a better grasp on how the life they have lived might have influenced their outlook. We hope that everyone continues to engage with their legacy of critical nationalism beyond today's discussion. Before we start with our open forum, we invite Dean Davista to join our speakers in our table to receive questions, comments, or reflections from the audience. Kindly approach or raise your hand in the preparation to a microphone if you want to have your questions. The floor is open.
Din sa Maroko kayo sa Pirates Squad po. Gandang hapon po, Ifemia Pianoffer from NHCP and Projects SI. I just remember one good intersection of Renato Constantino's life as a historian and as a journalist is his interview with Gregoria de Jesus when he was editor of the Philippine Collegian. And there's the pictures in the book I just saw of them interviewing Gregoria de Jesus, the first lady of the Hanging Bayan Catalogan and Widow of Andres Bonifacio. And the family has a picture, the copy of the picture is now displayed in the very same room where the interview was held at the Bahay Active Bautista in Manila. So my question is, have we ever encountered a transcript or the article published in the Collegian which contains what Gregoria de Jesus said in that interview? Because even the family doesn't have a copy and have been searching far and wide for a copy of what their lola may have mentioned in that interview. Maraming salamat po.
I don't have the answer to that question. Because I think the insert on that interview was done by someone from the Constantino family. And although now there is a surge of interest in Orion, given the film and the new perspective which surrounded her persona, as somebody who is distinct from Andres, but who is also deeply attached to him, the same way maybe that you show us to Renato. But maybe someone in the family can point to a source. Because the thing about Orion, I listened to an open forum about her after the filming, parang preview of her life. And then there was someone there, the daughter of Andres Cristobal Cruz, who interviewed Carmen Guerrero Nakpil. She was a Nakpil and therefore related to the second husband of Orion. And she said she wanted to interview Orion, but she was always prevented from doing so. There was some kind of a cordon sanitaire there because they thought Orion was sort of in between sanity and something else, So the projection was that she was such a sad person at that point in her life when she could not blend into the elite culture and she was in a way isolated. They were speaking French or Spanish or something like that. And so the family sort of had a protective fence, not to allow maybe discerning writers like Carmen Guerrero Nakpil to be in close touch with her. But that interview was in the 1930s. It may have been a different context. So maybe it's worth digging the family files for, if that's possible.
Several answers, Yufi. Thank you for the question. Several layers, none of which might make you happy, or maybe all will make you happy. I often tell my friends now, ang buhay ko mula activist to archivist na yan. And first on Orion, my family, my friends are very happy that there's been a spate of movies and theater productions on Orion, such an important figure. But apart from one theater production, it's a shame that the way she's portrayed is such a cliche of women. Pag pinanood mo yung scene, she's just crying all the time as if she needs something or help. She was a revolutionary who existed, as Steve Embari said, independently of Andres or Julio. And to your question on that interview, on the manuscript, if it's there, it will be found. The entire compound has rooms that are not yet explored. When we did the Leticia Life in Letters last year, a major exhibit for us, we opened probably 5% or 10% of boxes that are yet to be fully explored. And if you have that much volume, you have to be very careful in just opening everything and jumbling everything, especially because it involves crumbling papers. But I'm quite confident that if it's there, it will be found. Not because of Renato, but because of Leticia. She was a relentless chronicler. So when we did the exhibit of her, and we will do, we're already underway with a lot of digging for the Vicente Museum that our friends from Alpha and Beta mentioned earlier. Two two big boxes alone. From the 1940s and 1950s. Love letters lang ni Renato at Leticia. Okay? She kept all of them, many of them inside the same envelopes, handwritten with stamps. There are other boxes which contain receipts, accounts, what she bought as gifts every week for 50 or 60 years. And then there are the manuscripts, the drafts. Renato rarely wrote anything that did not pass Leticia. Not because Leticia asked for it, but because Renato wanted it and preferred it. And it actually made Leticia, just go mad sometimes in frustration, which she also wrote in her many, many diaries. Because once Renato knew that a draft that he did was already written and edited by Leticia, wala na siyang pakialam, okay na yun. Fact-checked, doesn't matter. Leticia has seen it, has corrected it. And if you ever work with Leticia, maybe kami lang po yung Tita Inday or Karen, but when we drafted things and we sent it to her to check, it would go back almost like it was written in red. Kasi, I've never felt so embarrassed. I thought I was good in writing and speaking in English especially. Hindi papasa kay Leticia. So, marami pong mahanap dyan. Intact files of the collegian, many, many other letters. When he was alive, Carlo Dong was asking me to find certain manuscripts that I remember that I saw it, but it's in a file that we have to patiently open every now and then. Once it's found, alam mo naman, you'll be the first to know. Promise you. But time is limited, so I hasten to also add, to emphasize, Dr. Raja asked earlier about a book, and I say it formally in front of everyone, let's do it. We will do what we can to do that. Second, I think before we started, I already told Dean Laviste the same. If she thinks that the college would benefit from a reprint of that account of the press in 1983 or 1982, then we will do so happily with the College of Media and Communication, as long as the Dean can write the new introduction and help us choose what other things can be there. And let me put Karen on the spot as well. That we're already considering you might want to take it on an updating of the nationalist alternative. Who's at Billing Person is 2.5 years. Yun po.
Right, can I just yes, also to right. I think what is clear for me now, having done all these readings before I came here, that Renato was arguably the earliest in addressing the problems of how a native was integrated by the colonialists. Just like Titus in Alatas wrote The Myth of the Lady Native. But if you look at it, it was actually Disraeli, then the Prime Minister of Britain, announcing in Parliament at the time when they were having this Bangkok Treaty, 1874. Warren Hastings represented the British, while Disraeli was defending, saying that we have cannibals eating each other. This is the white man's burden, which became subsequently the story the Americans told for the purchase of Philippines, Cuba, and a number of other places. I'm saying this because Renato spoke about this in quite a number of work that I read. Among them includes Dissent, Counter Consciousness, and then of course the miseducation of the Filipino, the first issue of JCA, and a number of others. So, and he was He came out with it in 1970, as opposed to Edward Syme, the most famous on this, 1978. And then Orientalism is the book. Then we have in 1977. But what I'm still researching on is what he told in 1986. He said he can be a great capitalist studying Marx. He said in his speech he can be a great capitalist studying Marx. Now the important thing here is what Bruce mentioned in my subsequent reading of Capital Volume 1 and Volume 2 is why they didn't like oligarchies, why they didn't like mercantile capitalism. Because much of what they did was to waste, not to reinvest as productive capitalists. That's why Marx and as far as Bruce McFarlane, so I believe now, although that was not interpreted so much by Renato, that's key, which he didn't see happening with the new government, the populist government. I'm still trying to see something in black and white to bring that to, just that. Thank you.
Thank you for answering this question. Do we still have any other questions from the participants? Yes, please.
Actually, I kind of have one question per speaker, so baka matagal tayo. So, I'm sorry I kind of didn't put your names. I just put first speaker, second speaker. So, for the first speaker, I want to ask, how do you balance grounding in theory in journalism history with, against the accusation of being agenda driven? Because I studied literature, so I know being grounded in theory, but then you're dealing with real people, so I think that kind of affects things. And second speaker naman is I was really intrigued by what you talked about of ecofeminism, because I like eco-criticism and feminist literary theory. So I'm thinking of what's your advice for people what's your advice for people like me who want to write literary works that have eco-criticism and feminism in them, because I like movies that deal with nature problems, like Nausicaa of the Valley of Tubin by Hayao Miyazaki, and it also has a feminist aspect because it has a female protagonist. So I'm thinking of how do we mix those two together, especially when we have feminism on the other hand, because I'm kind of struggling, there's a meme of people, there's a joke where men can't write women properly and I want to transcend that. So I'm thinking, how do you become a good eco-feminist in poetics especially? So for the third speaker, I want to ask this might be my most controversial question, but then what do you think Renato Constantino thought of actions the post World War II zeitgeist of for example, the United States became more powerful and arguably they were the ones supporting fascists this time because America supported people like Pinochet in Chile and Stroessner in Paraguay and of course Marcos in Philippines. And I'm thinking did you think Constantino regretted the fact that a sort of evil got replaced by evil in a sense, parang. And for the fourth speaker, I was going to say text first that my father's actually part of Alpha Phi Beta fraternity, but then I'm the only one here kasi ako yung nerd sa media. But then I want to ask, how do you implement economic nationalism today? Because one time I had a project in school where I talked about my plans for agriculture include giving speedboats to fishermen that are Philippine made. Because it's easier than big boats that harm the environment. And there should be irrigation and tractors everywhere in the Philippines. Do you think that's a good policy, or parang it's suntok sa langit lang yun. And for the fifth speaker, one last na talaga is like, it's like how do we overcome like poverty of memory when we're like, how do we parang like, how do we become conscious of the poverty of memory, especially when we forget like the climate aspects of things? Because the tendency is to like, there's like a sort of like STEM versus HUMS type of thinking where like, oh, the climate is for scientists lang yan. And for the history, that's like for the humanities people lang yan. So like, how do you like unite those two in overcoming the poverty of memory? So yun lang, sorry sa medyo mabigat na sinasabi ko. So,
I hope that our speakers were able to get to all of the questions raised. But yes, for the question addressed to Professor Renato.
Thank you. I was no student of literature. I did science and economics, but still, let me try to answer you, at least provide you an answer. My understanding of Renato reminds me of Promoda Anantatoya. This guy was actually nominated for a Nobel Prize, but the government opposed it. He was classified by them as communist. Likewise, I will not classify Renato at all as a communist. I didn't classify him. Just like Sukarno, to me, they are all nationalists. But speaking about that, Renato was not xenophobic, but I didn't look at his work to capture that sort of an element. He was not xenophobic, not anti-foreign. In fact, he asked the relevant questions to see aspects of developmentalism in line with recognizing who the national is. Nationalism, the way I saw from his eyes, is to be used productively, not to be peripheralized, to be brought to the forefront. I think that's the sort of nationalism I think we should always present, but not in one where you suddenly dream of a particular nationality become the world leaders, like what the Japanese tried to do in the Second World War, the presentation just now. But I just wanted to make that point before I pass the cue to Professor. I think you were the second question.
That was a very abstract question, but let me answer it from the way I developed as a feminist. Because there are feminisms and feminisms, from liberal to Marxist to radical to socialist, postmodern, etc. And ecofeminism sort of wove the threads that were useful from the others. Like it has a class analysis. Who is, polluting the world? You need to study capitalism 101 to understand where the pollution is coming from, where the overconsumption is being promoted so that we can consume more of what we don't need while wasting all the resources, the water, the energy, etc. So then you get to a point where you have to think what is most important at this stage. And I do agree with Red that we must save the planet because we are on the very edge. We're about to drop from the cliff. And we need to be a more caring humanity, meaning that we need to preserve what we still have, life on earth. We need to prevent wars and make peace. We need to have many of the things that make life worth living. So the ecofeminists would say, well, I value life more than all other values, and I would do everything to preserve life. And that comes also from the socialization of women into caring roles like motherhood and all the ones in the care professions, teaching and all that. But it's not what you would call essentialist. Meaning not all women are caring. You know, you have people like Margaret Thatcher who stole milk from the kindergarten children in the UK when she prohibited all the welfare schemes for the vulnerable. Right? So it's not, it doesn't have, it is not biological determinism that all women per se are capable. It's the way we are socialized and the way we are made conscious of what is important in life. So then it translates itself into literature. I think Red has been into the workshops on ecology, environment, etc., where the writers get the science of it, and see the urgency of action, whether in places which matter to you, like in the fields that you are active in, academically or socially. So I hope that answers your very complicated question.
Thank you, Dean Renato. Unless Professor wish to respond to that question.
I wasn't the speaker, I just gave the opening remarks, but if you want, you're asking about journalism, I could say quickly that journalism is not just technique, it's also episteme, and when it's also not just arts, but also scholarship. And what could we say about journalism? That it launches a relentless critique of everything that exists. The same could also be directed to journalism to make itself accountable to the public.
Thank you, Dean Aliste. Professor Pereira.
Constantino was a critic of American imperialism and Japanese imperialism and Spanish imperialism. He did not privilege any of the imperialisms because it's a world system. Read more Constantino. Buy the books outside.
Thank you, Professor Pereira. Dr. Remy.
Hello. First, Red mentioned the nationalist alternative. Just need to some updating that maybe this guy on my right can lead the group. And then of course we have some representatives here. We have also Attorney Arellano here, one of the pillars of the Philippine labor movement. Maybe can join the group. Yes, we can organize that. Now on I think there was a question about agriculture. Living, how do you, here, we're talking here of economic nationalism in the way Katato does it. It's a way of, it's a prism. It's a, how do we look at problems and issues of society through a nationalist perspective, using the weapon of the usable funds. That's very, very important because you cannot. So that means you cannot address problems of agriculture or industry without a understanding of history. The problem of the role of imperialism, colonialism, neo-colonialism, and the wrong ideas implanted by the IMF and the World Bank, and then so designated for liberation of the mind. And without that, but this liberation of the mind should be a collective one, and that's why he's addressing his writing not only to so-called intellectuals, but in particular workers and farmers. So that's why the nationalist alternative that was mentioning is really a product of a group effort. He invited I remember where some labor people, some farmers, it's a series of discussion. And so it's a collective effort. And so, but you are always aided by what we are saying as the usable past. Now, it is in this context that the praise that sentence from Tato is very good. Hecho Filipino is a decolonized Filipino. Well, if you want more clarity about this, we can discuss this after this meeting.
Thank you. Finally, Sir Renato.
Very quickly, on the poverty of memory. Several layers. First of all, I hope you'll recall the poster of the French Open that we showed. Because it always made Leticia and Renato frown. Not scowl, but frown. Whenever they were told by family or friends that their books were required reading textbooks in high school, not just college, they would frown. Because they would always say right after that they never wrote their books or pamphlets, especially the history volumes. They never wrote them for the academe. That was the purpose. If it was useful, great, but they meant it to be read by the public precisely for the public to understand and be aware of their place as makers, potential makers of history. And that's why they also propagated the concept of a usable history. Because if history is not usable, my favorite acronym is WTP. Yung iba, WTF. That I also like, but apart from saying what the fuck, WTP. If history is not usable, what's the point? WTP. Right? And history is everywhere. It surrounds us. As I hope I showed a little bit in words, in trees, in our surroundings, in personal memory, collectively as a nation's history. Poverty of memory is also not the fault only of the people or the masses. It's also the fault of those who say that they're progressive in the left, but are the first to forget. Because they will remember the birthdays of Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, celebrate Hugo Chavez and Ho and Mao and so on. But they will not remember Pedro Abad Santos or Orián de Jesus or Emilio Jacinto. Or the 130th anniversary, which is very important because that's where the nation comes in. Many times a section of the left would say nowadays, parang uso, workers have no country. Yung ba alam yun? Sabi ni Marx, workers have no country. Yes, he said that. But he also said in the same paragraph, workers have no country. They cannot take what they've never had to begin with. And that is why he said that the struggle must first be national. Because the working families need to build the nation in their image, not in the bourgeois image. They need to build a nation of their own. That's what the Katipunan achieved. And that was what was aborted. And that is all our tasks today. And besides, those who say workers have no nation are also just silly buggers. Why? Because they say workers have no nation, and at the very next breath they say, free Palestine. Sus Mario said, nation for others, but not for yourself. It's also why we fought for a free East Timor as nationalists. Because real nationalism, rooted in our history, requires our nationalism to be internationalist. The freedom of others is also going to determine how free we are. And so the poverty of memory is something that plagues many, including all of us. And we need to address it, confront it, because it will make our lives far more colorful and more interesting. Our past is very much alive. It's not even past, as they say.
Can I just say one more? I also wanted to bring something that happened in 1986. Because I was talking about the electronics industry, which in 1986, 87, 88 also affected the Philippines. There was mass retrenchments. There was one side of the group that believed that that's the end of capitalism. I said no, because these guys are reinvesting. Capital labor ratios are rising. This is the cost of competition that brought about that. Let me also mention that indeed happened. Let me mention that if you read Schumpeter's third book, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, he has 3 books as far as I know. I don't know his first book because it's written in Austrian, German language, because he was Austrian then. Then the second one, Theory of Economic Development, 34. The third one in his preface, he glorifies Marx first. He actually acknowledged that his thinking comes from Marx, because Marx scientist. I pronounce it Schumpeter. Joseph allows Schumpeter, or Schumpeter as you want to put it. Now he actually mentions that the gales of creative destruction drawn from Marx, because competition forces firms to replace old modes of technology with new ones. That's in the preface. You can actually look at that. So that's what I felt, because the only 2 people that defending me were Bruce McFarlane and Renato Constantino. The others were talking about the end of capitalism. I don't know if Rene remembered that.
Thank you for answering the question and for the discussion that we were able to build. Are there any other questions from our participants? Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Sachi. I'm a grade 9 student, and I have a question for Sir Ed. How do you think leaders should lead people to choose life when most Filipinos of today see more of what is in front of them, namely the materialistic things? I have also been recently reading a pastor visited for my school, and I'm actually homeschooled, so I'm reading it along with Ambit Campo, and I've also been taking ideas from it. But from what you were saying earlier, I really want to know how you ideally think leaders should show people how to choose these kinds of how to make these kinds of choices to make what you're saying it a better nation for all of us. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for being you. Thank you for reading those books. It's a wonderful question indeed. And I invite my other panelists to also try and answer, not just me. Thanks for asking me first. Let me relate it first to myself. It's a lesson that I grew up with, which I think, if I remember correctly, was given to me by my parents, father and mother, which was given to them by Renato and Leticia in particular. That if you wish to be a leader, you must be ready to follow. If you think you're a good leader, the measurement also is, are you a good listener? If you think you're a good leader, are you ready to listen and confront disagreement and learn? Because you cannot learn if you already know something, which means experience is all about a person with a lot of mistakes. And if you wish to gain experience points so that you can become a better leader, are you prepared to encounter a lot of mistakes as well? Leadership starts from a very, very, very humble beginning. Because the great leaders, as Renato and Leticia have taught many, not just their family, the great leaders are the ones who make themselves unneeded, unnecessary. The leaders who are always required or who are always needed to be at the lead, at the front, always present, their voice necessary, are not such great leaders also. So to make yourself indispensable was taught to us as bad leadership. And real good, strong leadership is about leaders who lead by by making sure that they are not always at the front. In fact, they allow others to lead, not just them, or not just them, even from the beginning. So it's complex, and your question is actually, to me, a very good sign, a very good basis of a leadership question that you're already grappling with, and I hope you pursue it. The other side is what I related to earlier when I showed the monument about Rizal and Bonifacio together, because they needed one another. And history shows that it's one big flow. The way we've been taught our heroes is horrible. Laging mas matapang, mas maganda, mas mabait, mas matalino, mas magaling. Laging mas. Our heroes are always better, smarter, sharper, more strategic, more visionary, prophet-like. When in fact our heroes were just like us. May kaba sa dibdib, may kabog, may landi, may kembot, marunong sumablay, marunong umibig, marunong matakot. Pero nung tinawag ng bayan, kahit may kaunting kaba o baka malaking kaba sa dibdib, sinagot nila. When their people called for them and the times needed them, they answered, even if there was anxiety in their chest. Our heroes are like us. They're not super women or super men. And that is also what connects with the poverty of memory, because the past allows all of us who learn from the past to become good leaders, which means at some point you're no longer a leader because many are already leading as well, which is a good sign you've done well, because you're not the only one on whom everyone depends on. They depend on themselves. The sense of agency is strong in everyone else. If that happens, you've done really well. That's what good leadership, I think, is. So keep reading, and I hope you remain interested in the past. It's very liberating, it's very entertaining, and it gives a lot of clues to all our problems now. So for instance, yung kanina binanggit ko, West Philippine Sea dispute. I always hear somebody, perennially, always, there's someone who would say, I am ready to give my life and limb to protect our islands. Islands that they haven't seen, or tasted, or smelled, or touched. And yet they're prepared to just let the native trees in their backyard get chopped down, and esteros polluted and destroyed, and mountains excavated, and sand shipped off to other countries. That's also part of our sovereignty. Are we only brave because of things we don't really see? We need to be brave here and now. So, many facets. One is asking those kind of questions.
Thank you for that very lucid answer, Sir Renato. The other response.
Maybe I just add one point. I've been thinking about collective leadership. I fully adopt and agree to the points that Red mentioned just now. But apart from the fact that I've actually been on factory floors, including on salmon farming, for example, in Piedmont. I was doing this job for Unido, where they did 6 months of breeding the fries in freshwater lakes, carried the helicopters to the sea, and left there for 2.5 years. And then to the extent where they're commuting, telemonitoring, sorry, the customers that go to supermarkets, they can actually see what's happening. And that was actually protested by workers. What I'm saying here is with the entry of AI, we are expecting something of the point that I mentioned earlier, that we don't want to have a division of labor where workers just do the execution and management is the thinking, consumption. Now, in order to have that, there needs to be collective leadership too. Because everybody is thinking, everybody is creating new knowledge and so on. I've been thinking about that, which I think increasingly we need to address if we want to see a clusterless society.
Read the Cartilla ng Katipunan.
Let me repeat in clearer terms friend said, read the Cartilla of the Katipunan. 100% correct. If you want a guide, that's your guide. And don't just read it, find ways to improve it. Because that wasn't meant to be a static document. It has to reflect our values today. Your values need to be ascendant. Especially, not just because of your age, but your values as a young woman. The standards today are very high compared to ours, which is already probably high compared to Karenes. So yours, don't let it go lower. Yours is the floor. What was acceptable during my generation is unacceptable today, and that is good. Especially because of young women's leadership that refuse to accept the stupidities and brutalities and misogyny, of course. So those things as part of the input to the Cartilla. Cartilla, I don't think can go better than what Leonard suggested.
Thank you. We now have time for one last question from the audience.
Hi, I'm Renato again. My question is, as we're revisiting Renato Constantino, is mainly about his leadership. No? So my question is simply, when did foreigners start reading Constantino? At what period in time? And secondly, how did that happen? I'm not sure if it's an input from the mentees or the foundation itself of how what was it because he was writing elsewhere, no? Publication elsewhere, or were his publications being distributed abroad at the same time?
Characteristic of Tato is yung tinatawag na critical thinking. So, editor pa rin siya ng collegian, kini-question niya na yung ginagawa na Commonwealth President, what US is doing. And so ito yung example of leadership talaga, but it should start really this sa utak eh. So, because yung kanyang critical thinking is also reflected sa isang pamphlet niya, Veneration Without Understanding. Sometimes, we have a list of heroes and heroines, and then, without understanding how they became heroes and how they confronted real problems of society in their time. And I think that's where we can measure true leadership. When you're able to analyze the situation, and you have tried to help transform a bad situation into a better situation, or what activists in the labor movement were saying, how do you transform the working class from a class in itself to a class for itself? Because you cannot become a class for itself without understanding the labor issues, problems, their suffering, and so on, and without analyzing what are the root causes and then what are the not only individual but collective solutions. And that's why you have the societal approach. So, and here comes the use of past. And what happened to not only in our country but also in other. So, now all of a sudden I am reminded of Pedro Abad Santos because Red keeps referring to him. You know, Pedro Abad Santos is the brother of Jose Abad Santos, the Chief Justice, who was executed during with the Japanese during World War II. But you see, he was so popular among the peasants in Central Luzon that whenever they have problems with certain big landlords in Central Luzon, because in Central Luzon at the time were composed mainly of hacienda, they would go to him. And then I was shocked when I heard the story that his advice, but one time they went to him and he said, sunugin nyo. I said, wow, tama pala, no? But probably maybe it's a colorful expression. But what he was really saying is, you bring this problem, but you have to go out in the field and then confront the landlord. And this would happen in the history of Central Zone. So many big fights. And that's why when martial law was declared in 1972, pinupok ni Marcos ang Central Luzon ng land reform. Nakalimutan naman yan the rest of the country. Doon na mulaklak yung new tipos armies, the rest of the country. Anyway, very, very useful talaga yung magkaroon ka ng a prison na kung tawagin is usable bus.
I don't know when was the time that the foreigners were reading Constantino, but when I was doing my studies abroad, I came across a book by Constantino, but with an extended introduction by Itzban Mesbaros. He's a Marxist, and I was so proud of it. I found that book and I brought it to my class, and we were reading Marx, volume 1, 2, and 3, and discussed it before my class. I think it was written in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken.
1970, Neo-Colonial Identity and Counter-Consciousness is the book. Eastman Mezaros was a very, very good friend of Renato and Letty, just like Harry Magdoff. And so that friendship is because they were also very much involved in scholarly circles, especially in Journal of Contemporary Asia. And you know, the book Identity and Consciousness, the very thick pamphlet that looks like a book, was an essay, a long essay he delivered at the World Sociology Congress, I think in 1967. That essay itself, which is part of neo-colonial identity, and Istvan really wanted to write the introduction. And Istvan is one of the foremost Marxists in the world. He wrote what is one of the most fascinating books called Beyond Capital. It's scary because I think it's this thick, but it's a compelling take on his focus on alienation and many other things. But it reflects his interest, the intellectual interest of Renato and Letty. Kasi magkasama sila lagi. And you know, they would host dinners. Some of those dinners, they invited me to join. And those dinners I went to because the food was always great. My grandmother always made sure everything came together. But sometimes the subject matter was constipating because they chose subjects per dinner, and they would invite experts. For instance, one dinner was about mathematical theory, and there were 3 or 4 mathematicians who would come, and it was him, Caroni, Merlin Magallona, and no, Wayne wasn't there, and the discussion was about mathematics, and the starting point was talking about the first few equations of the reproduction of capital, and then it became algebraic very quickly, and I just started eating my food. It's like, what the hell, wow. But, you know, foreigners reading Renato, I have a humorous take on this. Because there were some foreigners really, for sure, a lot of foreigners who read Renato. In particular, based on an actual classified document in my job as an archivist that I found in one of the files, which spoke about, I think it was 1951, that said to the Pacific Command of the United States, which was then the top intelligence bureau of the U.S. And it said there, confirmed 3 undersecretaries in the Department of Foreign Affairs are card-carrying Communist Party members. And there are 2 more under investigation. We can't find any links, but we're pretty sure these guys are communists. One of them was named Renato Constantino. And then there was a field that says veracity. Highly credible source that always reports to us all developments and always dutifully reporting to us. The name of their source was Ramon Magsaysay. That's it.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask the pleasure of our speakers. Amenable to one more question. Sorry with everyone. All right, I think we have one more question. Our final question for today.
So good afternoon po. I'm Neil. I'm a writer from an independent news outlet. So for my question po, it might seem anticlimactic as this is the last question of this forum, but what did Renato Constantino think about the UP Diliman commune? Since I feel that question is appropriate as to our venue right now. And how does the factors that led up to the commune still affect us today? How does it reflect as to what's happening currently? Thank you.
Well, we were in Diliman during the commune, but Renato, we were not, I wasn't his mentee yet, so I wasn't privy to what he really thought about the Diliman commune. And when we were writing his biography, I didn't encounter any columns or anything written about the Diliman commune. But maybe Red would have some information or duty, because I know that when it comes to the left politics, he was always for unity, but he was also not too, how should I say it? He was always on the side of caution, that you don't come in unprepared and let the state plumber you. You know, when the forces of change are not that developed, even if there's an objective situation that change can really happen, if the forces that can carry it forward are not prepared, then you may just lose potential leaders of the future who will be imprisoned or killed. You know, in a situation where you're clearly not going to win. So he favored more the patient kind of activism, meaning you go and educate people, you have awareness raising, you do solid organizing, so that then the people become masters of their own fate. And you won't have students and intellectuals doing their work for them. You know, because the Diliman commune was essentially the student movement rising to the occasion, but not with any clear support, let's say from the organized trade unions or the farmers movement. It was something dramatic and adventurous and very attractive to young people like us who thought, well, we will blow down the world tomorrow and we will win and there's nothing to stop us. That was the milieu of the first quarter storm. It was mainly student-led. So if you look at Renato's and Letitia's writings, they would talk about mass mobilization, the empowerment of the working people, you know, and not a few people who are enlightened who will go lead the march and do the fighting for them. That's not how they thought. So I don't know if you read anything about, but there was a whole pamphlet that Judy, the mother of Red, edited and consolidated about the debates within the left and the side he took after that. It was in favor of a more peaceful, more patient way of being a revolutionary, not necessarily, and not leading to, let's say, a very popular view that the highest form of struggle is armed struggle. Because even, you know, Lenin, who was the most revolutionary of the hard left, would say, well, there are 100 ways to win power, and only one of them is peaceful. We will take the peaceful path, he said. Because who will do the dying? Not us, but the people who will do battle and get killed. So Letitia was always saying, well, who's going to do the dying? She always asked that question. And who are we to presuppose that they should do the dying while we lead the charge?
I saw at least one column. There must be more. We did write about the Diliman.
I guess might be the last answer to today's event. Again, several layers. Renato and Leti always encouraged dissident behavior, dissident thinking, especially historical thinking, which was also evident from the Diliman Commune, something that we are all students of today, studying the generation of Sina Tita and Dai, because a large part of what we are today can be traced there as well. But troublemaking is never enough. And so the book that Tita Inday was referring to is outside. It's in a bright blue cover. Fetters on Tomorrow. A large part of the debates on the left is there. One of the things that I remember there was a column he wrote that was called, that referred to workplace activism, which is, it doesn't say it this way, but it's actually one of the stronger responses to what I myself call the cult of full-time. That the only revolutionary are those who go full-time. Most of us need to work, and work is not counter-revolutionary. And so if you're a worker, your workplace is your main venue of activism. Not to leave it and to go full-time, but to make change where you are, where you work, as an outcome of the life of heroes. They favored, of course, and he wrote leadership for Filipinos, parents and activists, on the side of the activists, and also counseling them how to work with their parents and how parents should think, because he encouraged activism. But they both discouraged activism that was based on dogma, on doctrines, because they've always said dogmas are dead ends. You read in order for you to gain the wrong judgment. And they were very critical of movements that attracted independent thinkers who, upon joining the movements, the independent thinking is the first that's killed. Because there's a line that has to be followed. The movements that will succeed and flourish are those that encourage independent thinking. The heretics are encouraged, however troublemaking they are. Because we all have to think independently. No one can tell us in the end what we need to do. They can, and some do follow, but those who last are those who, I think, are forever heretics, who will not follow the rules. And I've always said, popular saying is love makes the world go round. That's true, but also false, because it's stubborn people that make the world go round, who refuse to accept that this is already what it is, that there's no alternative. No. There will be setbacks, but the setbacks are experience points that will make us better. There will be tragedies, there will be triumphs. Our job is to synthesize and learn from them and do better. Every generation creates their own poetry. What is yours? Write it, live it, but also think it will be your turn soon. So encourage other independent thinkers. Because the task of change doesn't stop with Renato and Letty. That's why we're all here. The relevance is that we're all trying to make them irrelevant. They would like that. And as my late father said once to his children, he's very sad that a pastor visitor is still relevant, still needed. And he was sad. But also, I think if he were around today, he would be happy that we're all here talking about the works of Renato and Letty. And maybe on a final point, the Diliman commune often evokes a large part of our struggles today, where you often see or hear the words never again and never forget. Support those two slogans. Support them, but also think, why is never again and never forget only starting in 1972? History began far earlier. And there were atrocities that were worse. Why are we privileging the atrocities only of martial law? Do we not learn how the oligarchy became such during martial law, perpetrating the brutalities propped up by the US, by learning what came before them and how the monstrosities that we're dealing with today is because of our past, but also learning that we have a lot of things that went forward, as Karen said earlier, in economics, in culture, and many other things. So the past can also be a means to give us hope, but hope that is active. I don't believe in optimism and pessimism, and I guess that can be the final word. Don't be an optimist, don't be a pessimist. The pessimist will lean back, hold his beer, because he believes, she believes, that everything is doomed anyway. Fuck this, let's have a beer. An optimist will lean back on his chair, hold his beer, and say, everything is going to go well anyway. Let's just drink. Both will not do anything. Hope, active hope, or in the words of another friend of mine, hope means never surrender. The task is never finished. I guess that's a good way to end.
And with those words, before we close,